Hi, welcome to Critical Myth Theory. My name's Alexander.
My name's Joel. Let's get into it.
All right. So today, to kind of wrap up our discussion on the fantasy genre as a whole, we decided to cover the topic of Star Wars. I think maybe on the outside, if you look at this, you might be scratching your head saying, what in the world, why are we doing Star Wars in a fantasy? Isn't it science fiction? And I'm going to say no, it's not. It is a fantasy genre story within a science fiction setting, but the actual genre of the themes and the design of the worlds and whatever else is actually a fantasy one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a magic system. There's night combat and whatever else, right? Like, it's definitely a fantasy story. So.
Oh yeah, and it's how you looking at the differences between fantasy and sci-fi. Fantasy kind of has this past mythological, a long time ago, sort of element to it. And in Star Wars, it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Right.
And sci-fi has this more futuristic element to it, and it's a lot less concerned with one side versus another, and with this one being in the clear moral good and this one being in the clear moral bad. The morals are a lot more static and defined in fantasy than in sci-fi. And sci-fi uses it kind of imagines futuristic technology as well, futuristic society, a lot of post-apocalypse as well as apocalyptical stuff in it as well. And this would definitely fall under a fantasy story.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the themes that sci-fi wants to kind of study are not the same themes that we see in Star Wars, right? Like, oftentimes you see in sci-fi, like, explanations of things, like how are we doing time travel? Not time travel, space travel, right? Space travel's always been a question for us. And so a lot of times science fiction will try to tackle that, and they'll come up with different theories and they'll apply them. Star Wars just says, yeah, we're just going to do light speed travel. They don't even explain what's going on. They just assume that you can follow along with their thing. And they just use it as a narrative travel device, not as a scientific study, right? Mm-hmm. And you see that, and that's just one example of something different between Star Wars and the rest of what you would consider science fiction. That being said, Star Wars has quite a bit of other genres mixed in with it as well. I'd still say that the core of it is fantasy, but you also see the kind of this kind of emerging of different genres that George Lucas had intentionally put in. He was a big fan of the old Japanese samurai movies and the old Clint Eastwood cowboy movies as well, the westerns. And so in a weird kind of way, he brought this. He brought both of those to Star Wars. We get the Jedi and the Sith are typically portrayed as the samurai, how their sword fights are. The lightsabers are more, I'd say, akin to a katana than they would be to, like, an English longsword, for example. And the fighting styles will tend to be a bit more, more in that sense, like a Japanese duel than it would be a, yeah. And then at the same time, you got the gunfighters who typically kind of represent the old western. You got someone like Han Solo who kind of has that Clint Eastwood kind of vibe to him, where you get the idea he's not a great guy. He's kind of a edgy kind of character who only does things for his own good, but at the end of the day he still comes through and does the right thing.
Yeah. And something else in terms of genre, when we're talking West and East, we can also talk about the religiosity as well. So there's a lot of Eastern religious import into the Jedi, for example. Sort of this Buddhist disattached feel to it as well. Mm-hmm. And so you can tell that it's strongly influenced by that as well.
And even like the Western denial of the spiritual realm, right? Mm-hmm. We see that quite a bit too. Those who aren't engaged in the movement of the Force can often be pretty skeptical about it, right? We see this, and New Hope is kind of the introduction to Star Wars, and we see that kind of theme then portrayed in Han Solo at the moment he engages with this idea of the mystical Force, and he kind of just shoves it off right away as this old-fashioned, weird idea that doesn't seem to live up to his experience, and I think that kind of what's the word? That kind of, I don't want to call it ignorance, but that attitude is very, very similar to our Western attitude.
That just do something. You don't have to believe anything. Just do good.
Exactly.
That type of thing. Or it just straight up doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting when you point that out because, that's one of the, I guess it would be one of the admirals, I suppose, on the Death Star who says that to Darth Vader, your religion is dead. You're the only remaining survivor of it. So sort of, yes, this Western religious secularism and skepticism.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side, you're having rebel pilots tell each other, the Force be with you. So there's still this, I'll say it flippantly, as I usually will, the hope of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of this hope in the will of the Force that what they're doing is the will of the Force, and sort of the faith that because that's the case, they will come through.
Yeah. And exactly. It seems like the rebellion is more eager to mix the two, right? They're more eager to have their religious Jedi ideas kind of pulse through the ideas that they're fighting for, whereas the Sith and the Empire seem almost like two separate things. You come into the throne room of the Emperor, and it's almost mystical in its difference, right? Like the powers of the Force aren't really present in the power of the Empire until you come across Vader or the Emperor. It's kind of this weird disconnect, as if the Emperor wants to keep it secret and kind of hidden knowledge. But I think we can kind of talk about that when it comes to the dark side and their wanting to keep things in the dark.
Yeah. Well, and that doesn't really surprise me. I mean, the light side and the dark side. We can move on to that point.
Yeah.
If the light side is that which follows the Force, and does not follow the good for oneself, but follows the good for something higher than oneself, they're selfless.
Right.
Whereas the dark side, those who follow the dark side, embody selfishness.
Yeah.
And it's keeping their power secrets and their religious secrets for themselves. So it doesn't surprise me that Palpatine and Vader would be the what would you say, the holders of the Force, whereas it'd be quite separate from the more secularist Empire.
Right.
That doesn't like anomaly too much. It's a tyrannical. It's beyond orderly. It's a tyrannical state. It's doesn't like anomaly all that much.
Right. Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. And yeah, it's ironic too that at the same time this overly ordered empire, tyrannical in its order, at the same time has at its very top this maniacal and senile wizarding, old wizard who cackles madly and who has this bit of a chaotic edge to him.
Yep.
And so you can kind of see this imbalance of that character traits of order and chaos.
Yep. Although because he kind of rose out of the law, out of politics, I would probably, to use Dungeons and Dragons terms, because they're helpful, I would still call him lawful evil.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And then it's strange because it seems like the light side and the dark side, it's a little bit of disagreement as to what they are as we see the franchise progress.
Yeah.
In the original trilogy, it's very clear the light side could definitely do without the dark side. Light side defeats dark side. That's the will of the Force. Light side follows the will of the Force. Dark side goes against it and goes it for its own selfish means, and it should be eliminated. It's evil. It's the embodiment of evil.
Mm-hmm.
However, as we see in some of the newer stuff with the prequel trilogy, but I would say especially in the Clone Wars episodes, let's say the Altar Mortis being an example, you start seeing the dark side almost as if it were a necessary antithesis to the light side.
Yeah.
It's almost as if it kind of helps poke at those decaying and corrupt spots that if you're not looking at, you don't really pay attention to. And it's as if he keeps trying to poke at that, and the light side needs to stay vigilant.
So it's almost like this two perspectives of the light being the... Right, so like the one hand, the first kind of people that you were talking about, the first group of people that would look at the Force as, the light side is the embodiment of the good and therefore should be looking to always take out the evil. That would have this very, I would say, a Christian message kind of built into it. As we see the same kind of thing, right? Following the will of God the Father, and sin is kind of the representation of the dark side there, because it forces us to rebel against the will of the Force, encourages us to embrace selfishness. But on the other hand, then, as you're saying, you kind of talk about the necessary presence of the dark side and almost embracing it as a necessary antithesis. It almost sounds like it's like a yin-yang situation. And so it's like you can take it one way or the other, because it's definitely, it has to be one or the other, really. It can't be both at the same time.
Okay. I think we can talk about two extremes, and I hope that I can bring this across well enough. The one extreme, I would say, is one that I personally like, probably more because of what I enjoy reading. It's that the dark side... that there are some necessary parts of it, such as anger. It's good to have a just amount of anger, and it is a dark emotion. And other darker type emotions that can be utilized for the good. And one might say that there is an element to the dark side that is necessary but not evil. It's its excess that would become evil. The other side, though, is to say that, this might be getting a bit ahead of myself here, but if the whole metaphysic of the Star Wars universe is that the metaphysical content is the will of the Force, the light and the dark, then, if that flows through everyone, the energy for what is good and what is evil comes from the will of the Force, which means that if the dark side were defeated, both physically and metaphysically, then in theory you don't have that decay and corruption anymore, which means that it necessarily needs to be defeated in order to have a good universe. And then, there's a question of, what does an eschaton look like in a Star Wars universe? That'd be interesting to look into.
Yeah, for sure. And like we see, I'd say, the representation of both these sides when it comes to the prophecy in the prequel trilogy. So Anakin Skywalker is known to be the fulfillment of the prophecy, the chosen one, who's meant to bring balance to the Force, right? And when we watch it from a perspective of, we grew up with episode 4, 5, and 6 before the prequels, so when the prequels were new to us, we understood that Anakin did actually bring balance to the Force in Return of the Jedi. He threw Palpatine over, bringing balance to the Force, having the light side beat the dark. Suddenly there was, at that point in time, there were two characters who represented the light side, Luke and Anakin, and no more characters who represented the dark side, because Palpatine was dead. And yet, I've seen an argument being made for this idea that Anakin brought balance to the Force at the end of episode 3, not the end of episode 6. He fulfilled the prophecy when he through his actions, defeated all of the Jedi except for 2, leaving 2 Jedi and 2 Sith as a sort of balance. And that's the argument being made there, and I think, again, that would represent the side of the yin-yang argument that, that the true balance of the Force is not light over darkness, but light and darkness together.
Mm-hmm. And the growth that the two produce, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's, with Anakin Skywalker being the chosen one, he very much destroys this order that has become very comfortable and used to its predominant position within the galaxy. Mm-hmm. The Sith hadn't shown up for 1,000 years, which is their natural antithesis. They followed the exact opposite. I can't quite call them morals, but we'll call them that. How about the exact opposite code than that the Jedi do. And they haven't been around to challenge them, and they've just fallen into cloudy disarray. Now, partly at the instigation of Palpatine, but they don't see it coming until Anakin is the one who points it out, but then also kind of destroys them even as soon as they know. They are so unprepared.
Actually, it's funny too because the opposite, like you mentioned how Anakin was the first to point it out, and I actually would say there's actually Dooku in Episode 2 who was the first to point it out to Obi-Wan. Literally laid it out to him.
That's
the
true.
Truth of it all. He said, the Jedi are being manipulated by this Darth Sidious, and Obi-Wan didn't believe him. So it's kind of funny. Like in hindsight, you'd think that the Sith are the ones pointing it out to the Jedi. Hey, we're here, and they're going, no, that's not possible.
It must have just tickled Palpatine pink. I mean, just knowing that two of his apprentices had been like, hey, there's someone controlling you, and you just refuse to see it, and they're like, no, he isn't.
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? Like, there's no guard for it. There's no fear to steal their defenses, as it were. Right? The Jedi were comfortable. There was no belief that this Jedi could get defeated. Even the presence of a Sith Lord, probably scary, but I don't believe that any of them had an idea of the scope of it all.
I mean, it's a whole order of Jedi versus two Sith. I mean, they're probably... I mean, you can even see it in Mace Windu, who brings some of the strongest masters to arrest Chancellor Palpatine. He's like, oh, okay, these 4 masters will do, and it's like the 3 are killed within the same amount of seconds that there are masters.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. They're just slaughtered, and whereas Alex was theorizing, and I think he might be right about this one, that Palpatine was playing with Mace Windu and feigning weakness in order to turn Anakin to the dark side in a false move of desperation and compassion.
So that was like first time I watched the movie. That was exactly what I felt. I'm like, you know what? There's no way that Mace Windu would be able to actually face off against Palpatine, and yet here he is allegedly winning the fight. And so for me, it was like this clear, obvious manipulation, and yet at the same time, I'm told that there are quite a number of people out there who hold to the idea that Mace Windu is actually beating him. And I think that's just the Mace Windu fan club who like to think that he's more powerful than he is. They're like, no, he could totally take Palpatine. He's such a master of the Force and such a master of combat. Palpatine was never a master of combat. And, I mean, Palpatine could see the future. I don't think that there was no chance of him not... Yeah, he took a gambit, sure, but he knew it was going to pay off, and I don't believe that there was any chance of Mace Windu ever winning that fight. Even if Anakin didn't show up, I feel like he would have faced the full wrath of Palpatine. See, Palpatine came in 5 seconds, killed 3 Jedi Masters, and left 1 because he only needed the 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and if it's just the 1, then it's a personal account, because now it's not just 4 Jedi, it's named Mace Windu. Yeah. It's very much this person versus this person, so there's a very personal aspect to it. And it's, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's ironic. Palpatine clearly knew this. This is the one Jedi who he kept alive for this in specific conflict, was the one that hated Anakin the most. Yeah. And
that Anakin then would have in turn hated the most as well.
Yeah.
Right? If Plo Koon was the one that Palpatine would have decided to spare, and he killed Mace Windu and the other 2 right off, it wouldn't have had the same gravitas for Anakin.
Yeah.
So that was my my feeling going into the movie. I know there's going to be plenty of people out there who disagree with me. Again, the Mace Windu fan club I know is very strong. So, and honestly, feel free to disagree with me if you want to have the discussion. We can.
We'll go to war.
But I will strongly hold the fact that I'm pretty sure Palpatine.
I will strongly hold the fact. Okay, real presumptuous there, eh?
Oh yeah. No,
okay.
I will hold to that. Hold to that defense. How about that? We'll make it a bit more open-ended.
Oh, you could have stuck with fact, Yeah.
Criticized
one way and then criticized the other way. But I guess we can look at this, just take a step back and say, you can kind of see this through the time where the dark side needs to be eliminated by the light side, to this point where we're almost Well, in this time period, it's definitely this sympathy for the devil that we're moving towards. As always, I will bring it up in every episode until I get to do the episode Loki.
Right.
Sympathy for the devil. So it seems to me that the lines between the light side and the dark side, as time progresses, are slowly getting blurred. Not so much that you can't call them light side and dark side anymore, but it's more that you don't know which one to call good and evil.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think the term sympathy for the devil, I think perhaps your biggest manifestation of that in Star Wars would be Darth Maul, as a great example of that. We almost feel bad for him when we watch him during the Clone Wars and all the stuff that's been produced since Dave Filoni's taken over. And as an aside, I love Dave Filoni's work. In the stuff, I could tell he's a true fan of the content, and I actually really enjoy his work in it. That being said, I do believe that that's the direction they're going with that. Right? We almost feel bad for Darth Maul in some sense, and yet he's truly despicable. There's no redeeming quality to Darth Maul, and yet people are. You almost feel for him in certain circumstances, and maybe not as badly as you might for someone like Loki.
Yep.
But I think there's still kind of that edge going to it in Star Wars.
And just to supplement your point, I mean, in the first movie, he was both awesome and you kind of... Well, he killed Qui-Gon Jinn. He was maybe the most lovable of the Masters,
right.
because he was the only one who had his eyes wide open. And Yoda later on, but you really loved this Jedi Master, and he was compelling, and that was definitely the duel of the fates. This is like, okay, in retrospect, Anakin would have probably done just fine as Qui-Gon's apprentice.
Yeah. He would have thrived. I think that would have been the fall of the Sith without the fall of the Order if Qui-Gon had trained Anakin.
And Darth Maul, being this evil servant of Darth Sidious, kills Qui-Gon Jinn, and then you see Obi-Wan step up and kill Darth Maul, and you're like, okay, Obi-Wan, here's his power, So he's very much that device. Dave Filoni brings him back, and he becomes, more of a complicated, not so much Sith, although he claims to be one, but he's got a revenge vendetta against Obi-Wan. Not one that wants to destroy the Jedi Order, just one who wants to destroy that one particular person. He becomes a crime lord. And then after that, he becomes a bit more of a complicated character in Rebels, who still just wants to kill Obi-Wan. So he will side with the good sometimes, and coincidentally. But he's still an evil character, but you will often have plenty of sympathy for him.
Yeah, almost times where you're rooting for him.
Yeah.
Right, but clearly he is the villain, and he embraces the dark side. He embraces selfishness and rage and all these negative emotions, and yeah, we're almost compelled to feel for him and to want him to succeed. And I think that is one of the, and it's subtle. By no means is it obvious. You're not sitting here saying root for him. But there are moments when you're like, oh, okay, I'm actually cheering for this despicable character. And I think that is definitely what we see in this conversation of the sympathy for the devil, or rooting for the devil, right? We almost want evil to win because it's still kind of fighting for good in a sense. And so we start blurring the line between what is good and evil. And that's kind of, I think, the big problem with this. But I think we should have an episode about just the general topic in general, the sympathy for the devil episode at some point, and how it shows up in our current culture, and our current mythology, for sure.
Yeah, we'll see.
That being said, we definitely, like I said, I think we definitely see that, and it's very different than what we see with someone like Anakin, because we aren't rooting for Anakin at any point up until, like, after he's done his evil deeds. We're meant to be afraid of him. We're not meant to be rooting for him up until the point where he has a redemption. And the redemption is not enough to forgive him, perhaps, for all his past sins, but it is enough to bring him to the light side.
Yeah, and to make it a little bit more specific, I mean, you are upset because he's a tragic hero. He's not a... He wasn't fallen to begin with. He wasn't evil to begin with.
Right.
He's fallen from being the most powerful Jedi to the most powerful Sith Lord. Of course, legends and whatnot, but let's deal with what we have here in the movies. And he obviously is having a lot of these struggles. And also, since the prequels come by virtue of being prequels, they come after the original trilogy, he comes back. So that's not a sympathy for the devil situation. This is the greatest character delved to the lowest of evil and brought back in grace by his son.
Yeah.
So it's not at all sympathy for the devil.
No.
That would be the difference between Darth Maul and Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I think that the central motif of Darth Vader in the Skywalker trilogy, the Skywalker saga, let's say, for the first 6 episodes, is the most important part of Star Wars. Right? It's fun to kind of venture off into these other sideline quests and whatever else, like with Clone Wars and whatever else, and Mandalorian even. But again, the central theme of all of Star Wars has always been Anakin Skywalker's fall and redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, we see that with the prophecy in particular, and because ultimately at the end of the day, Anakin is the chosen one.
Yeah.
Right. The entire series for the first 6 episodes is about him, and that's exactly it, right? He is the chosen one. In every sense of the word, he fulfills the genre description of what a chosen one is, and he's even labeled as the said chosen one. So I guess that kind of brings up the question then, just as a topic, because we've talked about Harry Potter last episode, we talked about Anakin this episode, who are clearly meant to be the chosen ones, but would you say that the concept needs to be cemented in the story, being called the chosen one, or does there need to be some sort of prophecy to kind of point them towards that?
Well, okay. Well, I think the first thing to point out, it's not as if there are heroes who are the chosen one and heroes who are not the chosen one, and they're 2 different genres. It's more, this is more specific and cosmic. Right. Would be, that would probably be the virtue of it being a prophecy. And the prophecy's in words as well. And it's often ironic, and it plays out in a way that we as mere mortals do not understand until the end of it. And it always plays out in unexpected ways. Or at least it seems to between Star Wars and Harry Potter. So with Harry Potter, the irony in that was that the prophecy needn't have come true. It's just that since Voldemort believed that the events would have necessarily been determined, he continued on as if the prophecy were necessarily true.
Right.
Which kind of forced Harry Potter, in the end, to defeat and kill him. So it was Voldemort's hanging on to the prophecy as necessarily true, no matter what he did, that brought about the prophecy's fulfillment.
Yeah. We see the same thing with Anakin, right? He's given these visions of his mother and then later on of Padme. And yet it's these, because those are prophecies, not necessarily the prophecy of the chosen one, but these are visions that he has. These are almost prophetic as well. And it's only through those visions that they end up coming, or the second one at least, maybe the first one was Shmi, his mother, that he had no power over, sure. But the second one, right, where he watches Padme dying in childbirth, and yet he is the one that causes that to happen because he has that vision. If he never had that vision, Padme wouldn't have died in childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of this ironic prophecy, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where it's like, if it didn't happen, if you didn't see that, then it wouldn't have happened, right?
It just reminds me, and this is so stupid, but it reminds me of the quote from Palpatine. Ironic, he could save others from death, but he couldn't save himself. It's like in Anakin's case, it's he could save himself from death, but he couldn't save others.
Right.
But I don't think that's the point. I think that's just a funny thing to point out. Ironic, yeah. Plenty of irony. With Anakin, however, the prophecy plays more within his own character, rather than in Harry Potter, it plays within Voldemort's character. So it's actually our hero, or a tragic hero, in which the prophecy's result is played in. And it's because of this prophecy that he becomes such a contentious character. It's in Anakin Skywalker that most of the conflict between the Jedi and the Sith, that's where it happens. That's the battleground. In the original trilogy, it was in Darth Vader's heart, between Luke and the Emperor. And in the prequel trilogy, it was between the Jedi trying to keep Anakin's emotions at bay and probably not teaching him how to deal with them properly.
Right.
And Darth Sidious, or Palpatine, trying to manipulate those emotions in order for him to overdo it. And they're both extremes of a tug of war that, results in what he became. And then
I mean, I guess the interesting thing with Anakin in particular, when he fulfills the prophecy by throwing Palpatine over the edge in Episode 6, in a weird way, it's actually Luke as well kind of fulfills the prophecy. He's not strictly called the Chosen One, but yet we know him to be the hero of the original trilogy. Right?
Yeah.
He fulfills the role of the hero in the classic hero's journey.
Well, he was the first hero before Anakin was the tragic hero.
Exactly. And it's only because of Luke that Anakin's able to even become the fulfillment of the Chosen One.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is kind of an interesting sideline, but
well, and we go back to our question: did Anakin fulfill the prophecy? And the answer is yes, and it doesn't matter which way you look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
We already talked about this, but just in terms of what prophecy he's fulfilling, it's a bit more ambiguous. Is it that we have 2 Jedi, 2 Sith, or is it just that the Sith are destroyed? Either way you look at it, he definitely fulfilled the prophecy, and it was in the person Anakin Skywalker himself. Yeah. I think after this, we've talked about our main points in Star Wars. We have obviously omitted the Disney Trilogy, which, we can probably spend a little bit of time talking about right now if we wanted to.
I genuinely try to avoid the topic of the Disney Trilogy, just because, first of all, for me, like I was kind of saying before, like Anakin was the main character of Star Wars for 6 straight episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The whole plot of everything revolves around him. It starts with him and it ends with him. So why in the world are we telling the story of 7, 8, and 9 as if it's accepted as the Skywalker trilogy when it really isn't?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Vader. It has nothing to do with Anakin at all. So for me, it's like there's this very clear disconnect, and I can use that then to disconnect myself from it, not accept it as a part of this Star Wars saga. I know it's canon, and that's unfortunate, because they are quite awful, objectively awful.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, there's some subjective things that I dislike about them. There are some subjective things that I actually don't mind about them, but I would still say that they're objectively awful. Yeah. I don't remember ever going into a Star Wars movie feeling disappointed until The Last Jedi and
The Rise of Skywalker.
I mean, we disagree on which of those two is worse. I do not like The Last Jedi, but I will say I believe that it's a stronger film than The Rise of Skywalker. I felt The Rise of Skywalker felt like a fan fiction, but that's felt like a teenage kid who loves Star Wars got his hands on the script for a movie production and was able to put his fan fiction to life. That was how I felt about that movie, but they tried to mimic certain moments of Endgame while rewriting some of the things that were redone in the second one. Mm-hmm. And I think that the second one had potential to subvert our expectations, and that's kind of what I enjoyed more about it, whereas the third one just felt like a complete mess. But yeah, it's
look, I mean, we need to speak of this because it is part of Star Wars, and it is part of the episodes. So unfortunately, it is something we have to speak about. We both actually don't mind The Force Awakens, as far as I understand.
Like, there's enough wrong with it that, like, if I want to critique it, I really can. But, like, on the one hand, yeah, I mean, I think my bias is showing when it's like, you know, the best of the pile of crap is still a pile of crap. But on the other hand, was it as bad as The Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker? By no means. I don't even think it's in the same category.
No. I'm actually probably more optimistic on this one. I think that it has its issues. It does, absolutely. The big only objective issue that I can put on that I can say that is beyond my preference. This is actually an issue with the movies that is beyond my preference. It's Rey not losing whatsoever in this first movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's like where's the development? I mean, she beats the she beats the main bad, at least in that episode. The main bad constantly switching throughout the series, which is another problem, but she wins, and it's like, okay, I didn't mind it watching the movie for the first time, but I started seeing the results afterwards of her winning that. If she had lost, then it would have been a lot more, let's see how she's grown, and you would be more invested because you know that she's capable of losing, She's actually human. She's not she's not a god. And I wonder if it's part of this fear that comes with making movies today of making female characters look weak. I think that's a big part of it. So it's nice to, fine. I mean, it doesn't really bother me or anything like that, but that is an issue because which mob is going to come after you if you have your main character be a female character?
Yeah.
Is it going to be your fundamentalist mob, or is it going to be your activist rights mob?
Right.
And
I guess
they really kind of trapped themselves in this one.
Yeah, I think you're right. The way that I see it is that, like, there's this idea that a woman character is a good character because she's a woman. And it's like, no, you can write a good character no matter what gender or what race they are. Or you can write a bad character, and their race and gender will not play into the quality of that character, right? Rey would have been a bad character if she was a man, right? We'd be saying the exact same things if she was a man. And again, like, she's not, by virtue of her being a woman, is now suddenly a good character. That's not how it works, right? There's this idea that we need to elevate women to the same place as men in society. I don't, like, obviously we understand that there's the same inherent value in men and women. Whether or not that's represented in our culture, I guess, is a different conversation we can have. But I guess my point is that you're not going to elevate Rey or women to this state of equality by making their difference the only virtue that you let them have. Right? Let the character be a good character, and if she's female, that's fantastic. Right? I would much rather root for a good female character than root for a character who's a female and you want to be good because of that.
Yeah, and it says, it gets into the next biggest problem with this Disney trilogy, and it's the import of Western social politics into a fantasy into a fantasy genre, because it's supposed to be, this is the good, this is the bad, and all of life is on the line. Right. All of good and evil is on the line, and now this is just an issue of social politics, and it's boring because we get into fantasy to avoid this stuff. Yeah. We get into fantasy to get into different worlds, but it just feels like our world all over again. It just feels like our Western world and its Western problems, imported rather arrogantly into the Star Wars universe. And then it's the difference between moralism and morals. Morals supersede ourselves, whereas moralism is like how we think we ought to act, based on what people have in an opinion of us. And it's a lot easier because it's without integrity, completely without integrity. And that's how this trilogy feels.
Yeah. And it's often that moralism is based on feeling.
Yeah.
Right? It's how you feel about it that really determines the morality of it. And yeah, so it definitely a very disappointing. So we kind of critiqued the Force Awakens, right? Like it's a cookie cutter New Hope. They basically just took the same concept and put it back into New Hope.
And yet it had potential with Snoke.
Yeah, like I didn't hate that. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate that as a New Hope. Like to me, that's not the biggest weakness of the film. And if that had been the starting point of a good trilogy, then I would have actually not minded it, right? Maybe I could have held it in higher critique, or at least higher, would have been able to subject it to more criticism, if that were the case. But it's clearly it was the highest point of the entire trilogy, and it was all downhill from there.
Now, the virtue of having, well, I should say not the virtue, but by virtue of having sequels, you're saying, oh, you thought that the big bad was defeated. Well, here's a new, bigger and badder bad. And I think they obviously saw that Snoke couldn't play that role, although I think that was a much better move than bringing Palpatine back, But then they bring Palpatine back, and it's just like, oh, who's a badder bad than Palpatine? And it's Palpatine, And then they play it off in some stupid line like, somehow Palpatine has returned, and everyone's like, what?
Yeah. If you watch that scene, like Oscar Isaac is like giving up hope in his statement. He's like, oh, this is the worst line I've ever had to read in my entire career, and he gives it right. He's like, somehow Palpatine's come back. He's like almost like so ashamed that he has to say this line, because it's just awful, and that's really it. And again, like we're making this now, we've made this trilogy, this saga that was based on Anakin Skywalker. Now we're making it about Palpatine. And I don't think that's right.
And honestly, Palpatine being the villain that he was, I would have been still upset, but I would have been, let's see where this goes, if he survived and won, like this trilogy, and be like, okay, let's see the next trilogy.
Sure.
Because that's doing justice to the absolutely destructive and powerful nature of this character, because if this trilogy was like all these easy battles, I would have forgiven The Last Jedi a whole lot more. All these easy battles where the good guys constantly seem to be winning, and then Palpatine comes in and just crushes it all.
Yeah.
And then then we start a new trilogy. I would have been tired of it, but it would have been forgivable.
From what I understand, the biggest mistake of the new trilogy was a lack of direction and coherence. Right? They went into it with this idea of no direction, right? We look at Marvel and we can almost praise it for its cohesion, and like they're referencing movies that they made 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Almost, right? Like, yeah, I guess 20 years ago now. Oh.
And they built up Thanos from
20 years ago, but almost.
Well, they built up Thanos from the first few movies all the way up to Infinity War and Endgame, which were like movies 16 and 18, I think, or something like that.
And they had one guy in charge who's basically able to enforce his vision the whole time, and it's this uniform. I mean, there are a couple of moments where maybe it clashes, right, where we see something that has to be reneged on, but most of it, I'd say like 90% of it is one vision with a clear-cut goal, and you can tell where he knows where he's going. Yeah. Whereas this, for example, they didn't know what Rey's character was. They had no idea what her lineage was after episode 7. They made it, and they're like, we could go anywhere.
And they picked nothing first, and then they picked Palpatine. It's like, well, first start with nothing, as if that were the answer, and now it's Palpatine, and it's like, man, just the thought of whatever. You know what I'm thinking of. Yeah. It's not right.
So, like, after episode 7, I was actually really intrigued because I was curious. I wanted to know. But knowing that they didn't even know really, like, just ruins it all, because there's no cohesion, right? There's no plan. Knowing that there's no plan in something that we want to enjoy, it just really ruins it. It's unfortunate. Like, for me, there was enough setup to suggest that she was a descendant of Obi-Wan. Right? Her first force power that we see her do is a mind trick. The same force power that we see Obi-Wan do. The Jedi mind trick. And she wears a garb that is very similar to Obi-Wan's in Attack of the Clones and Yeah, Attack of the Clones in particular. That yellow kind of stripy looking garb. And she has the same accent as Obi-Wan, and he's the one whose voice she hears when she picks up Luke's lightsaber. There was so much potential leading into that.
Could have made sense with this whole Satine story. And
yeah, exactly. There was
actually, it would have been clunky, but it could have made sense, you know?
A lot more sense than Palpatine. You're telling me that Palpatine procreated with someone?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's the cursed child problem, because apparently in order for Voldemort to have an heir, he needs to get busy with someone.
Yeah.
And that being Bellatrix Lestrange, and it's just uncomfortable. It's not the problem with... I mean, part of the problem is the villains getting weirdly busy all of a sudden just to have some heir to be the next bad guy, but it's also clunky because you already know what the story is beforehand.
Yeah. And like that's the thing too, is that like Rey being a Palpatine made no sense. It was probably the worst option out of all of them. Even saying that she was a nobody actually would have been good.
Mm-hmm.
I still wouldn't have liked it because, again, to me, the central motif of Star Wars is Anakin Skywalker. And to suggest that she is a nobody kind of really pokes a hole in that.
Yeah.
But I also don't hate that because maybe Star Wars can be more than Anakin, and I don't mind that either. But to suggest that she's... Anyways, because the other theory could have been, she's either Luke or Leia's descendant somehow or another. And I wouldn't have minded that either. I mean, we could have referenced the extended canon with Luke having a child. I wouldn't have hated that.
No.
But yeah, just making it Palpatine was, again, I think that was the worst decision they made. But honestly, no, the worst decision they made was not having a plan from the beginning. If they had set it up from the very beginning, said, you know what, this is Rey, she's a Palpatine, and Palpatine's going to come back at the third movie, and they had that from the beginning, we would have seen an entirely different trilogy, right? We would have seen build-up for both of those points, right? Even if they wanted to maybe throw that subversion of her expectations of being somebody when Ben tells her that she's a nobody, at least show the audience that Ben's making up this plan just to trick her, right? Like, because obviously that's not the case, but they almost accepted his word as true, which makes the deception feel empty because there was no reason for it.
I think that we can wrap up the Disney dump session, except for one more thing, and I think I'm getting into new idea territory, so please bear with me as I...
off script.
Well, depending on what kind of script we have points, Yeah. But this one kind of... I've kind of been thinking about this, but I think I'm only just able to put this into words as I'm thinking about it a little bit more. And it seems to me that as our culture and Hollywood especially starts moving into this, I wouldn't say it's a morally good way to go, but as it starts moving into this more existentialistic, gods of your own reality, sympathy for the devil theme, as it starts moving towards that, I think that they've got to stop making grand moral movies, because now that's a completely opposite thing to the god of your own reality story. Mm-hmm. A Loki story versus a Lord of the Rings story, let's say, or even an Endgame story,
or even Thor.
Even Thor.
I think it's a good example because they're both characters in the same universe.
Yeah, Loki and Thor. Yeah. No, that's really good. And we're seeing this move. I think that Disney should lay off of the grand cosmic battles, and start working at the psychological level. If they because the way that their philosophy / ideology is moving them, they will make very great movies in that and TV shows in that. I will disagree with the morals pretty much every time, but I will enjoy it so much because I can tell that they're going to do it well. But the grand movies are not going to be great because the moral good and evil and the stakes for them are just not going to be that high anymore because they don't really care about it so much anymore.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you on that because what I think is simply this, that this ideology of living up to your true self and this sympathy for the devil and whatever else doesn't sell. It doesn't sell. People don't enjoy it. Maybe we see it coming out, but that doesn't mean people are actually buying it up, right? Like for example, the Star Wars trilogy, this new Star Wars trilogy, is widely held that it's not good. I mean, I know there are people out there who like it, but the vast majority of Star Wars fans do not like it. That's nothing new. Granted, most Star Wars fans hate everything that's Star Wars, but I've never seen a fan base more critical of its own content. But I'd still say it's widely accepted as some of the worst Star Wars content ever made. And again, I don't think it's selling. They want it to sell, and they're pushing it, but it's not working. And like something like Endgame sells because it holds up to that moral value of these grand things that
protecting the whole universe.
Yeah, we're fighting for good. We're defeating evil. We're changing ourselves when we show signs of bad things, because that's right. That's a big theme of be yourself, live up to who you are. No, change yourself if you're a bad person. Yeah. Right. Like that's and Thor exactly the example of that. Thor couldn't be wielder of Mjolnir while he was this selfish evil prick, but then he had to come to changing himself through this what do you call it, this trial by fire, basically, and a self-sacrificing move that wasn't like his old character. He had to change, and that's a good thing. We can embrace that and look at that. But whereas Loki, it feels shallow. Right? We're watching Loki and we see this villainous character who's very selfish and doesn't trust anyone and can't be trusted with anything and anyone, falling in love with himself, and like this we're going to definitely talk about this, I think, in the Loki episode, but sorry, we're getting really ahead of ourselves here.
No, this is fine. I think that I need to qualify what I was saying.
Sure.
And I don't think that I was specific enough, because I still hold on to my view on this one, but I don't think in the way that I brought it across. Right. I don't think that I brought it across as well as I would have liked to. When I talk about Star Wars, I'm saying that's the exact reason it failed. It tried to do something where it was the gods of your own reality, but in a cosmic battle. Of course it doesn't sell, And I'm saying Disney did that so poorly that of course it failed, because they tried to do their ideology in a cosmic, universal moral battle. So I'm saying that of course that failed. I totally agree with that. I also have to say, with Loki, I enjoyed it a lot, and I think that it will not survive. You're right. That sort of stuff is going to be a temporal thing. We're always going to get back the same way that we occasionally have our pre-Socratics that will die. Our Platos and our Aristotles will always live, and it's the same way that we're going to have that with these great moral battles. Our Lord of the Rings, our Harry Potter, and a lot of our early Star Wars, it's going to live maybe forever, as long as forever lasts, and Loki won't. It's a product of its time, but it is relatively successful. It was watched an awful lot, as well as WandaVision. It won't sell for a long time, but I'm very excited to see this explored, because this is the underbelly of the ideology explored in art. And so that's what I mean when
I guess my point is that it's almost hard to tell. It's hard to gauge because of the fact that it's like I'm speaking specifically about WandaVision and Loki. It's actually hard to gauge how well it's being received. You can follow Reddit, but Reddit is extremely biased in so many different ways that you're not going to get a good representation of people who watch it. Box office numbers aren't exactly relevant because no one's going out to the theater to watch it.
It's also streaming.
It's also streaming, right? So there's so much we don't know about it. There's a lot of conversation we haven't had about it. Not to mention the fact that we're kind of dried up for material right now. Yeah. Right? Like we haven't seen any Marvel movie. We just recently had Black Widow. Which,
I haven't seen it yet. I'm just waiting. I mean, it's kind of whatever. I'm just waiting for until it's free on Disney Plus, and then I'll watch it.
I'll give it a rating about 4.5 out of 10.
Seriously? Okay.
There were moments where I'm like, you know what, this is not bad, and then there were moments where, again, it's the same kind of idea where women are held in a position of value because they're women, not because of what they do. Right, mm-hmm. and I don't. Well, not value. That's the wrong word. But they're held in like this. Heroic position by virtue of their
by their determined qualities rather than their heroic choice qualities.
I mean, that wasn't always relevant in the entire movie. I think the movie had enough where, you know, she, like, the characters were good, and it was just a very weak message. It wasn't a story that we haven't seen before. Overall, and that's why I give it a 4.5 out of 10. It's not nearly as bad as the steaming pile of the sequels to Star Wars.
Which, you know, we should probably get back to.
Yeah, but anyways, I'm just kind of getting my movie rating for a relevant conversation.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we more or less agree on the issue of the ideology guiding movies. I pretty much agree with you, but I don't think that I disagree with what I said originally. I think that we can briefly talk about Rogue One and The Mandalorian, perhaps.
Sure.
And then we'll probably finish it off right there. Solo, there's not a whole lot to say about it, except for I think you had one comment about it. Just if it were anyone else but Han Solo, it would have been fine.
I mean, it didn't feel like a Han Solo story. It didn't feel like, it felt like a Star Wars story, and I was fine with the world building and the characters that were in it. It's just the main character. If he wasn't Han Solo, if he wasn't trying to be Han Solo, then I would have been fine with it. Honestly, I thought it was a decent movie. But just there's this disconnect where you're like, he doesn't look like him, he doesn't act like him. Who is this? Why are we trying to pretend he's Han Solo?
Yep, and
you know what I mean?
It's sort of whatever, you know. After that, there's nothing really good or bad to say about it.
I thought that the film was fine otherwise.
I thought it was I could live with or without it and not be affected whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, definitely was better than Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker.
You know, if that's the bar to beat, then I think that the future might look bright. Yeah. But we'll see.
Yeah. Whereas for Rogue One, I actually really enjoyed it. It's interesting to me because Rogue One isn't trying to be a Star Wars saga film. It's almost, in my opinion, it's allowed to explore the differences, right? Because Rogue One clearly blurred the line.
Absolutely.
Between good and evil, right? They showed the good guys doing despicable things. Granted, they didn't show the bad guys doing good things. So you know what? I don't mind that either. Except for but it definitely blurred the line. It kind of showed you that maybe taking whatever steps for good isn't always a good thing, and I actually enjoyed that theme.
It got to the grittiness of war and showed it showed how in that way that good and evil clash, it's actually so much murkier when you're looking at the battleground level, when you're looking at it at the lowest level. How brutal and messy it truly is. So I really liked it as its new type of genre. It's not part of the episodes. It's
Star Wars story was exactly how they labeled it, right?
Exactly.
And I, for that reason, I actually really enjoyed Rogue One. And Mandalorian, same kind of idea, right? It's not telling the Skywalker saga story. It's telling its own nitty gritty mercenary story of these characters who exist across this universe with all these other bigger things going on around them, and it shows it. And I love that actually, like kind of seeing that background. I mean, I think Din is a very obviously he's like some sort of almost anti-hero. Like I even hesitate to say that because there is a lot of moments where he's just straight up a hero, but you can tell he's kind of motivated by less than virtuous stuff sometimes, by money, or I even say that I think it's almost like he's trying to be this hard-boiled mercenary type who's motivated by money, but then he still does the good thing, the right thing. It's kind of that Western cowboy motif of no, he's still going to do the right thing whether or not he's getting paid for it, right?
Yeah. Although, you know, money's a pretty good incentive.
It's true. Certainly is. But like for me, Mandalorian felt like a Star Wars role-playing campaign. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to role-play in Star Wars. It's exactly what it feels like. You're all mercenaries typically and doing things for money. I find it's a lot harder to actually find virtuous players in that kind of environment. And so I'd say Din is even more virtuous than most of the players you can find in a role-playing
I mean, that's
campaign.
pretty cool. I know that there's a few of you who play Dungeons and Dragons.
And that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's different systems that are different than D&D, but it's the same kind of game.
Otherwise, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
It's been a really fun episode. It's been contentious and lively, and I've enjoyed 70% of it.
Yeah, we've definitely gone off some of the rails. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about because I don't think Star Wars is done. While it's still producing money, Disney's still going to keep riding that bandwagon.
It's going to be milking that cow.
Yeah. So. And whether it's for better or worse, we're going to find out. Mm-hmm. Again, like I like Mandalorian, so I'm not terribly disappointed with where they're going. I think that there's potential for failure or for success there. So.
And Clone Wars, The Rebels, Bad Batch, I think we can always leave those for another day. They're TV shows, definitely animated, so a little bit more specific, and perhaps we'll get into those on a later date.
Also, The Fallen Order, great video game, and they're coming with a sequel at some point. Fantastic, but
I guess I ought to play that.
Yeah, I think you should. But anyways, We're gonna wrap up here. So, basically, we're done. First season, except for kind of a wrap-up episode.
Yeah.
Right? We kind of went through, Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis. We went through Tolkien. Harry Potter. Yeah, Rowling is what I meant to say. And now Star Wars. And so we're kind of, basically, with this season 1 theme, we're going to wrap it up with our final episode next week. Or I guess this coming week. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to kind of kick it off into season 2. No spoilers as of yet. I think we should probably maybe handle that for next episode. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion of Star Wars. If you guys have any more, I mean, obviously it's a very controversial issue. I think Star Wars fans tend to be the most vocal of most fans I've ever seen. So for those of you who are engaging in that conversation, make sure we hear it.
Yep, we got a Discord discussion section. Start slamming the keyboards.
Yes, please. And let you guys let us know what you guys think about this episode, and we'll catch you on the next side. May the Force be with you.
All right. Goodbye.